The ancient Maya, masters of astronomy, mathematics, and writing, built pyramids that still stand today, never carved a single pumpkin, not once. The ancient Egyptians. They constructed the Great Pyramid with over 2 million stone blocks, traded across 3 continents, but they never tasted pumpkin, not even close. For thousands of years, entire civilizations rose and fell without this orange gourd. And when it finally crossed the Atlantic in 1492, Europeans recoiled in horror. Everything changed. This is the story of the pumpkin, and it's stranger than anyone told you. Close your eyes and picture a world without pumpkins. No jack-o'-lanterns on October porches. No pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. No pumpkin spice lattes in autumn. This wasn't ancient history. This was Europe. This was Asia. This was Africa. Until 1492, 3 entire continents lived in total pumpkin darkness. But here's what they didn't tell you. While Europeans were building cathedrals and waging crusades, indigenous peoples in the Americas had been cultivating pumpkins for over 10,000 years. Archaeological evidence from Mexico reveals pumpkin seeds in ancient fecal deposits dating back to between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago. That makes pumpkins one of the oldest domesticated crops in human history, rivaling even corn. The first pumpkins were nothing like today's giant orange globes. Wild pumpkins in Mesoamerica were small as tennis balls and bitter as medicine. Their flesh was tough, their taste was terrible. But Mesoamerican farmers saw potential. Generation after generation, they selected seeds from the largest, sweetest fruits. They bred them larger, sweeter, more nutritious. Over millennia, they transformed an inedible wild gourd into a food source that would feed entire civilizations. This wasn't accidental. This was agricultural genius. Ancient farmers recognized value in those bitter wild gourds and methodically created something entirely new. The pumpkin became central to survival across the Americas, from the southwestern United States through Mexico and Central America, south into Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. But the rest of the world? They had no idea this miracle crop even existed. The indigenous peoples of North America didn't just grow pumpkins. They engineered an agricultural system so brilliant that modern scientists still study it today. They called it the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash planted together in the same mound. Here's the shocking part. This wasn't just companion planting. This was ecological genius. Farmers would plant corn first. As the stalks grew tall and strong, they planted beans at the base. The beans used the corn as natural trellises, climbing toward sunlight. Their roots contained nitrogen-fixing bacteria that enriched the soil. Finally came the pumpkins and squash. Their broad leaves spread across the ground like living mulch, suppressing weeds and retaining precious moisture. Those same large leaves protected the soil from erosion and discouraged raccoons from raiding the corn. Every component of the pumpkin plant served a purpose. The Navajo, Iroquois, and other tribes ate the flesh roasted, boiled, and stewed. They consumed the seeds toasted. They even ate the blossoms. But the real genius was in preservation. Some tribes dried pumpkin flesh into long strips, then wove them into mats for storage and transport. Others dried the tough outer rinds and sliced them into strips for weaving. This farming system sustained millions of people across 2 continents for thousands of years. It was sustainable, productive, and required no metal tools or draft animals. The Three Sisters provided complete nutrition: carbohydrates from corn, protein from beans, vitamins and minerals from squash and pumpkins. While Europeans were struggling with crop failures and famines, indigenous Americans had perfected a food system that worked in harmony with nature. Wait, it gets weirder. When Europeans finally arrived, they dismissed this sophisticated agricultural knowledge as primitive. They had no idea these savages had been practicing advanced permaculture for 10 millennia. On December 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus and his crew became the first Europeans to lay eyes on a pumpkin patch. They were in Cuba, exploring the coastline, when they encountered fields of strange orange gourds, unlike anything they'd seen in the Old World. Columbus was baffled. Europe had melons. They had gourds, but these were different, larger, brighter, more uniform in shape. He had no word for them in Spanish. His crew had no frame of reference. They collected seeds anyway, recognizing that these mysterious fruits might have value back home. The French explorer Jacques Cartier encountered pumpkins decades later when he traveled through the St. Lawrence region. He described them in his journals as gros melons, big melons. The French eventually called them pompons. The English tried pumpion, a word borrowed from the Greek pepon, meaning large melon. Shakespeare himself referenced pumpkins in his 1602 play Merry Wives of Windsor, using the English term pumpion. American colonists would later corrupt the English pumpion into pumpkin, the pronunciation we use today. Columbus brought pumpkin seeds back to Europe in 1492. The earliest documented evidence of pumpkins in Europe appears in the prayer book of Anne de Bretagne, Duchess of Brittany, in the early 1500s. The illuminated manuscript shows detailed illustrations of a living cucurbita pepo vine with fruits and flowers, proof that pumpkins had reached European soil. But here's what nobody expected. Europeans didn't embrace this New World vegetable. Not immediately, not universally. The pumpkin carried the taint of the exotic, the unknown, the potentially dangerous. It came from lands inhabited by people Europeans considered barbaric. And in an age of superstition and religious fervor, new foods were viewed with suspicion. The 16th century was a time of upheaval in Europe. Silver from New World mines flooded the continent, paradoxically making the poor even poorer. Inflation skyrocketed. Wages collapsed. Even basic foodstuffs became prohibitively expensive. Landlords enclosed communal fields, destroying over 2,000 rural communities in England alone during the 1500s. A full third of the English population lost access to land and the ability to grow food. Into this chaos came strange new crops from the Americas: tomatoes, potatoes, corn, and pumpkins. Many Europeans viewed them with fear and suspicion. The tomato was considered poisonous for over 200 years. The potato was banned in multiple countries. Religious authorities warned that New World crops might be tools of the devil or instruments of witchcraft. Pumpkins faced less organized resistance than tomatoes or potatoes, but acceptance was gradual and uneven. It took decades for attitudes to shift. By the mid-1500s, some countries began cultivating pumpkins on larger scales. France deserves particular credit for early adoption. French cooks experimented with pumpkin recipes, incorporating them into the evolving French cuisine that would later dominate European cooking. England followed suit, growing pumpions in Tudor gardens. Medieval England had been making pies, pastries with sweet and savory fillings, for hundreds of years. It was only natural that inventive English cooks would try pumpkin as a pie filling. Spain, with its direct colonial connections to the Americas, also began large-scale pumpkin cultivation, especially in Valencia and Andalusia. The truth is darker than you imagined. While European elites gradually accepted pumpkins, working-class Europeans remained skeptical. In Ukraine, pumpkins became symbols of rejection. If a man proposed marriage and was refused, the woman's family silently handed him a pumpkin, a humiliating public signal of failure. This tradition dated to medieval times, and Ukrainian men would only propose at night to avoid being seen carrying a pumpkin if rejected. When the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620, they were ill-prepared for survival in the New World. They arrived too late in the season to plant crops. They lacked knowledge of local plants and animals. Half the colonists died during the first brutal winter. What happened next changed everything. A Patuxet man named Squanto saved them. Squanto had been kidnapped by an English merchant 6 years earlier and sold into slavery in Spain. Spanish monks freed him, and he eventually reached England before returning to America as a guide and interpreter. When he discovered the Pilgrims starving at Plymouth, he taught them how to grow corn, beans, and squash, including pumpkins. The Pilgrims became obsessed with pumpkins. They had to. Pumpkins were easy to grow, stored well, and provided nutrition through the harsh winters. Colonial records reveal that pumpkins appeared at virtually every meal. A poem from the 1630s captures the Pilgrims' pumpkin-dominated diet. For pottage and puddings and custards and pies, our pumpkins and parsnips are common supplies. We have pumpkins at morning and pumpkins at noon. If it were not for pumpkins, we would be undone. The first Thanksgiving feast in fall 1621 likely included pumpkins, though probably not as pie. The Pilgrims and 90 Wampanoag Indians feasted together for 3 days. Pumpkins and squash were available and probably made into a type of pudding or baked in the fire. But there was no modern pumpkin pie yet. That would come later. Here's the part historians argue about. Pumpkin pie as we know it evolved from English and French recipes that made their way to colonial America throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. François-Pierre Lavarenne's revolutionary cookbook, Le Cuisinier François, in 1651 included Pompillon pie recipes. When translated into English as The French Cook in 1653, these recipes crossed the Atlantic with new settlers. The first documented English pumpkin pie recipe appeared in an English cookbook in 1675. No one saw this coming. The vegetable that indigenous peoples had cultivated for 10,000 years became the symbol of American colonial survival. Pumpkins saved the Pilgrims from starvation and became forever linked with American Thanksgiving tradition. Jump forward to the 19th century. Irish and Scottish immigrants brought with them a strange tradition, carving grotesque faces into vegetables and placing candles inside. But these weren't pumpkins. They were turnips, beets, potatoes, and mangelwurzels. The tradition stemmed from the Irish legend of Stingy Jack, a trickster who fooled the devil multiple times. When Jack died, God refused him entry to heaven, and the devil refused him entry to hell. Jack was condemned to wander the earth for eternity, with only a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip to light his way. The Irish began calling this spooky figure Jack of the Lantern, which became Jack-o'-lantern. To ward off Jack and other wandering evil spirits, people in Ireland and Scotland carved terrifying faces into turnips and placed them beside their homes. These original jack-o'-lanterns were truly frightening, far more disturbing than today's grinning pumpkins. On Samhain, the traditional Gaelic version of Halloween marking the end of harvest and the beginning of winter, these lanterns guided costumed celebrants through the night when the boundary between the living and dead was thinnest. When Irish and Scottish immigrants arrived in America in the 1800s, they discovered something revolutionary. Pumpkins were perfect for carving, larger than turnips, softer, easier to hollow out, brighter orange. The American pumpkin transformed the jack-o'-lantern tradition from terrifying turnip faces to the festive orange decorations we know today. This is where it gets weird. Some scholars question whether the jack-o'-lantern tradition was purely Irish. Evidence suggests that carved turnips called Hobardies lanterns existed in Worcestershire, England at the end of the 18th century, but whether Irish or English in origin, the tradition only became synonymous with pumpkins after immigrants arrived in America and discovered these superior carving vegetables. Today, Global pumpkin production has reached approximately 23.7 million tons annually. The crop that sustained indigenous Americans for 10,000 years now grows on over 3 million hectares worldwide. China dominates global production with 7.4 million tons per year, 58% of the world's total supply. India follows with 5.2 million tons. Russia, Ukraine, and the United States round out the top 5 producers. The United States produces approximately 1.03 million tons yearly, with Illinois, California, and Ohio leading cultivation. In 2024, U.S. production reached 1.44 billion pounds. But here's the shocking part. The ancient pumpkin has become a modern cultural phenomenon worth over $1 billion annually. And we're not even talking about the pumpkins themselves. We're talking about pumpkin spice. The pumpkin spice market was valued at $1.1 billion in 2023 and is projected to reach $2.4 billion by 2031, growing at a compound annual growth rate of 10.2%. Pumpkin spice has become a hallmark of fall across multiple regions, providing warm flavors that resonate with seasonal changes. Millennials and Generation Z have developed particular enthusiasm for pumpkin spice products. The flavor appears in lattes, donuts, breads, cookies, cupcakes, candies, and chocolates. But the empire extends beyond food. Pumpkin spice now appears in personal care products, soaps, body washes, and candles. Manufacturers market its aroma as stress-relieving and anxiety-reducing. Major companies like Starbucks, McCormick, Dunkin', and others drive this multi-billion-dollar industry. The real story gets stranger. Ancient indigenous techniques are making a comeback. Scientists and historians are recreating historical pumpkin varieties and growing methods. Museums display traditional Three Sisters gardens. Chefs experiment with heirloom pumpkin breeds that haven't been cultivated in centuries. The connection between ancient origins and modern experience has never been more tangible. The pumpkin's history is more surprising than you imagined. Domesticated 10,000 years ago in the Americas. Unknown to the rest of the world until 1492. Rejected and feared by Europeans for decades. Saved the Pilgrims from starvation in 1620. Transformed from Irish turnip traditions into American Halloween symbols. Now a global crop producing 23.7 million tons annually, and a cultural phenomenon generating over $2 billion in spice products alone. Every Thanksgiving pie connects you to indigenous agricultural genius spanning millennia. Every Halloween jack-o'-lantern links you to Irish legends of wandering spirits and carved turnips. Every autumn latte carries the legacy of Mesoamerican farmers who transformed bitter wild gourds into sweet orange treasures. The pumpkin crossed oceans, survived colonialism, adapted to new continents, and became embedded in cultures that had never seen one before 1492. From ancient Mexico to modern China. From colonial survival food to billion-dollar spice industry, from sacred Three Sisters companion to commercial Halloween decoration. That's the surprising history of pumpkins. Strange, unexpected, and hiding in plain sight on your autumn table. Every dish has a history. Every ingredient tells a story.